They're called Children in Care. Nearly 60,000 kids in Canada who need help from the government for shelter and security. They come from broken homes, rescued from abusive or addicted parents. But sometimes the system meant to protect them fails badly. Tonight, we'll tell you about one of those failures, the life and death of Paige Gauchier. It's a searing indictment of the child protection system in BC, and it's the subject of an RCMP investigation. According to BC's child advocate, Paige was a young life discarded. There were no red flags in child welfare offices when on a September day in 2009, a mother and daughter arrived in Vancouver among the pimps, pushers, and predators of the city's Skid Row.
It is an environment where there's a lot of untreated mental illness, there's a lot of danger, and there's very serious addictions. It's no place for a child. It was no place for Paige.
Paige Gauchier was 16. Caring for her mother, a hardcore addict. The girl was well known to BC's child protection system, but her life was about to enter a new and tragic phase.
Girls like Paige have a currency on the street. They are good for being sexually traded. They're good for low-level drug debt collection and drug dealing.
Every unsettling detail of Paige's life is laid out in a 75-page report. A chilling story told by BC's child advocate of how the system allegedly failed a young girl.
We're discovering that this child in 2.5 years moved 50 times, was abandoned on the street. She's sleeping in a shelter, a homeless shelter, where sometimes in the morning some of the people in the beds don't wake up. Who from our social care system was walking that journey with her? Or is it actually a lot of people putting their hands up and saying, there's nothing we can do for you? These kids should not be discardable.
Paige's life was turmoil from the start, in a home with drug abuse and violence. In the first year of her life, she was removed from her mother's care 3 times. Why was that home deemed a safe place for an infant to return to?
Well, that's was my concern in this report. The best place for children is with their parents. Well, I agree, that's true. But when your mom is actively addicted, and you're not going to be with mom. You're going to be in a safe place.
She should have come into care at a very early age. You know, you could see that her mother was stuck in her patterns and she couldn't get herself out of it.
Paige watched her mother use crack cocaine, and there was a report that she was molested by a family friend. She went back and forth from foster homes to other family members to her mother, a known drug user. Even when Paige found a good foster home at age 12, she couldn't escape her mother.
Mom came and slept under the window at the foster home and screamed and yelled at the foster mom. And then Paige would be in huge distress. Do you need to have 6 PhDs in social work to know what you need to do there? You need to get mom out of there.
Then, when Paige was 16, the fateful move. Mother and daughter came to Vancouver. Your words were that there was an absolute predictability of this tragedy.
She was living in a neighborhood that is known to be dangerous, particularly to Aboriginal girls. I mean, she saw people turn tricks. She wasn't brought into the sex trade. She was physically, sexually abused. I mean, she went through everything. People just left her in a position of harm.
No frontline professionals are spared in being criticized in this report, including the police and health workers.
Her file was rife with observations by social workers and others saying, we know the path that this child is headed on. This child is heading toward this outcome. Well, you saw that when she was 10, like she died when she was 19. What do we do to stop that? Why wouldn't we intervene to support that person?
She was lost and she was looking. She was always looking. She could never find the help.
17 different social workers handled Paige's file over her lifetime. Still, the people who pieced together her story say she never got the intervention she needed.
I've read that report 50 or 60, maybe 70 times. I get angry every time I read it.
Grant Charles was part of the 10-month investigation into Paige's life and death.
There's an indifference there, and I'm not sure how it could be labeled as anything other than indifference.
Over her lifetime, Paige moved more than 90 times among foster homes, shelters, and sleazy hotels, but always back to her mother. This was one of her stops, an urban slum known as an SRO, or single room occupancy. Mother and daughter shared room 223. It cost $45 a night.
They're disgusting. Often they don't have functioning bathrooms. There's people doing open drug use. There's, sexual favors being exchanged. There's mold, there's filth, there's the detritus of drug use. Social workers for Paige refused to go to see her there. So even when they got a report saying she's in X SRO, they're like, well, we're not going in there.
Now, the ministry says that there are no-go zones for them.
But they didn't for Paige. They refused to go for Paige.
Somehow that never translated into somebody saying, well, if I won't go there, why is it okay for her to be there? That's just, there's no logic to that. That's outrageous.
The death rate in these squalid hotels is 8 times the national average. They are supposedly off limits to kids, but Paige's mother found a way to sneak her past the front desk.
The only way they can get her up to her room was put Paige in the suitcase. They were having a hard time bringing the suitcase up. So there happened to be a man passing by, and they asked if he could help.
The guy working the front desk said, oh, I guess you're dragging a body up there. And they're like, yep.
That's only one example of a child protection system Mary Ellen says is in dysfunction and disarray. Whose fault was it? Was there a gap in the chain of communication?
Well, I think it's pretty clear the Ministry for Children and Families is responsible for the child welfare system in British Columbia.
But did they not get the message?
They got the message and they didn't act on it.
The report calls it professional indifference. The ministry takes offense to that term, professional indifference.
The minister was very upset with me with this report. But I said to the minister, well, what's your analysis then? Because you never reviewed Paige's case. Nobody so much as opened her file to investigate it. She was just another kid that died in the downtown east side whose passing made no mark in your ministry.
Despite the efforts of many, many people over almost 20 years, ultimately the system failed her.
Stephanie Cadieux, BC's Minister for Children, says more should have been done for Paige, but she defends her social workers.
It's difficult, heart-wrenching, emotional work, but they do it because they care. Because they're compassionate. I don't see that kind of commitment as indifference. I see it as passion and dedication.
In response to the Paige report, the ministry has set up a rapid response team focused on the downtown east side.
There's a team of people on the ground who will track and monitor the highest risk youth so that they can be there when they're ready to accept help and that they can be touching base with these kids on a regular basis.
The BC Ministry of Children and Family Development spends $500 million a year caring for kids and teens like Paige until they reach the age of 19. But family members say Paige never got the full attention she needed, like when she was found unconscious or incoherent on the sidewalks of Vancouver. The report says this happened at least 17 times.
Invisible. To me, that's what it seemed like. She was invisible. In her mind, she was still a little girl, a lost girl. In her mind.
Lots of people knew she was down there and nobody was reporting it. It's like there's this professional amnesia. We talk about collaboration and working together, but usually that involves a bunch of people sitting around in a room talking about how to do it, and not as much as people going out.
When she turned 19, Paige's file was closed. She was cast adrift. It's called aging out of care. The message that this story sends is that when you reach 19 and you're previously in the care of the ministry, that you don't matter anymore.
When you turn 19, you're shown to the curb.
Paige ended up here, Oppenheimer Park, ground zero for Vancouver's drug scene.
This is where she moved at 19. A garbage bag of her belongings was delivered to the last program they knew she was in, and this is how she became an adult in this neighborhood, really in this park.
It was a neighborhood that would swallow her up. Paige would not live to celebrate her 20th birthday. Next, holding power to account for the powerless. So then who is held accountable when no one reports a child in need?
Nobody. Nobody's ever been prosecuted in British Columbia for that.
Energy boost. I found that just for you.
Once a cop, now an outreach worker on Vancouver streets, Dave Dixon has seen it all.
Have a good day, sweetie.
He remembers meeting Paige Gauchier, and he knows the story of her life and death.
Paige was just one of probably a couple of hundred girls that I've lost, you know, that have passed away down here. And I mean, passed away. 15 years old is probably the youngest one I can remember. Everything's good with you?
Yeah.
Hey, what have I got for you?
Dealing with street kids, there's no room for half measures.
I mean, when I was a police officer, if I apprehended a kid that was so incoherent, you know, she couldn't even stand or walk or talk, you know, I sent her to hospital. But that's not the end of it for me. You know, the next day I would go up to the hospital and I'd say, where is she? And I would go visit her and I'd sit down with her.
But Paige Gauchier never really got that kind of focused care, according to BC child advocate Mary Ellen Turpo-Lafond. She believes Paige was seen by frontline workers as service resistant, someone who didn't want help.
Those are two words that caused me the most offense. Service resistant. Paige was not service resistant. Paige received no services. She had to raise herself in a dog-eat-dog world of one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Canada.
Mary Ellen wants those responsible for Paige's care to be charged under BC's child and family legislation for not reporting their concerns to the ministry.
I've gone back and forth with the government saying, you know, why can't we prosecute someone for not reporting? It's an offense under the Act, and the Attorney General has sent me back a very strong reproach saying my recommendations are inappropriate.
So then who is held accountable when no one reports a child in need?
Nobody. Nobody's ever been prosecuted in British Columbia for that.
If this had taken place, let's just say in the United States, would there have been charges?
Absolutely.
We put the question to BC's Minister for Children, Stephanie Cadieux. Shouldn't charges be laid in Paige's case? She had police files. She had 17 different social workers. She moved 90 times in her life. The writing was plain to see. I guess my point is, why have a law if there are no consequences when it is broken?
It's a good question. It's there for the purposes of enforcing. I mean, it is there for that purpose.
But you won't go so far as to say you would like to see it enforced.
Well, if indeed it could be determined that an individual didn't report and it directly caused harm to a child, sure, then yes.
In this particular case, will you be asking for an investigation?
That's not my role.
Okay.
My role is to look at the system as a whole.
In Ontario, there's a legal bid underway to hold provincial authorities accountable for child neglect.
It's only by a stroke of luck or God's grace that I am not Paige.
Tony Gran of Thunder Bay is one of 5 plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit against the Ontario government.
If you interviewed 1,000 of us, you would find that each one of us would have the same exact thing to say, that it could easily have been me.
Tony wants to be compensated for years of neglect and abuse she says she suffered while she was a ward of the state. The lawsuit hasn't been certified and nothing has been proven in court. Still, Tony sees herself in Paige's story.
We were both part of a system that was put into place by our government to supposedly help us. That system failed on an apocalyptic level. For the government's lack of oversight, Paige paid the ultimate price.
It's this kind of tragedy that we see time and time again across this country. It could be a report out of Saskatchewan or Manitoba or anywhere. It's just the content of that, the Paige report, just really clearly states what's wrong with so many of our different systems.
At some point, they write children off as unsavable, or we've done as much as we can. There is no coordination, that's the point. There's no continuity, no follow-up.
See? She gave me more grief than any kid I ever worked with. But I love her dearly.
Outreach worker Dave Dixon says that without constant attention and care, street kids in rough neighborhoods are at a terrible risk.
Down here, there is no safe housing for kids. Simple as that. I wouldn't place my kid anywhere near down here.
But down here is where Paige spent her last days, in a women's shelter just a stone's throw away from a park known for drug dealing. Easy access to crack, meth, and heroin.
On the edge of the park is where she was found dead, 11 months after she aged out of care.
It was just right down there where she was
That's
found.
right.
In a washroom, is that right?
Yeah, in a public washroom. Nobody showed up to help her. No social worker showed up that day, and nobody showed up after.
Dead of an overdose, just days shy of her 20th birthday. The government says there will be no formal inquiry because Paige was an adult when she died. The RCMP won't say who is being investigated in this case. Under BC law, failing to report a child in need is punishable by a fine of $10,000, up to 6 months in jail, or both. We'll be right back. Coming up next week on 16 by 9, violence in hospital wards puts nurses in the firing line.
You were very aggressive when you came in. You were spitting, so they had to put you in the restraint.
We have throwing objects to assaults with serious weapons in healthcare.
When that happens on the roads or in a bank line up or out on the street, we call the police. When it happens in a hospital, that doesn't happen. The rules are different.
The rules might be a bit different.
I remember at the time hearing like a popping sound. The joint had been basically crushed.
He's quite aggressive, spitting, shaking the restraint.
They actually had more violent events in 2014 than correction officers. There are lots of nurses who actually quit their job or leave the nursing profession altogether as a result of violent events.
So we're losing nurses from this?
We are.
We can take the restraint off one of your hand, okay? And then if everything is okay, then we can take the other two off.
They don't report because they're afraid of stigmatizing the patient. They don't report because they don't believe it will make any difference.
Are they right?
Perhaps in some instances.
We hope you'll join us for that story next week on 16 by 9. In the meantime, that is our broadcast for tonight. A reminder, you can always connect with us on Facebook and Twitter or at global16by9.com. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. From all of us here at 16 by 9, thanks for watching.